When it comes to supporting Pride at work, how far have organizations come? Why is the Pride Month so relevant for businesses? And what we gain from a stronger collaboration between corporates and the LGBTQ community? We have a very special conversation in store for you today. Two guests bring in their varied perspectives from two different lenses. Apoorva Bapna, who's the Chief Culture Officer at WPP, comes with a lens of how corporates are approaching diversity and inclusion and how Pride Month acts as an impetus. And counseling therapist Deepak Kashyap offers a voice for the community, bringing his rich layers of learning from years of working in sensitizing businesses and creating more inclusive workplaces for queer people. My first question to you is, why is it important to talk about sexuality at work at all?
Reasons why it's important is because there has been an assumption that workplaces are asexual contexts that we enter into. They've never been asexual contexts. Wherever there are humans, it is a sexual context. And not necessarily in terms of having sex, but in terms of being gendered, in terms of expectations, in terms of behavior. You don't talk to your female colleagues the way you talk to your male colleagues, for example. You do mention that you have a wife and you do mention that you have a child. So, for example, if we're all sitting in a conversation in an afternoon over lunch and my colleague says, hey, I'm so sorry for being late this morning because we were trying to drop our son off and my wife was trying to cook this amazing thing and blah, blah, blah. So what he's done during the storytelling is that he's admitted to being straight. But because straight is such a standard, such a given, such an assumption that we think it is nothing. But when a different standard, a different assumption comes through, that's when we realize that we've been doing the other thing for a longer time than we are willing to admit. So corporations, like any other human gatherings, are not asexual contexts. They are always sexual contexts, whether it is in terms of behaviors, whether it is in terms of gender expectations, or anything of that sort.
Mm-hmm. Apoorva, what do you think the kind of challenges do you face in bringing up the concept of sexuality in the workplace then?
Thanks, Danish, for the question. So, I'll tell you, and pretty much to the point that Deepak mentioned, in our kind of society, there is this whole taboo around, discussing sexuality, and more so when it comes to the underrepresented groups like the LGBTQI community or women for that matter, right? And that it also happens because we've rarely seen role models that we could identify with. There is a lesser sense of allyship, at the workplace, and very less workplace-led initiatives that truly work for the underrepresented group. That's one part of the story. Second part is really around the whole policy framework that we have across the corporate. And of course, I must say that it's changing for better now. But there's been a traditional sort of mindset on policies which sort of bring in this whole thing around men and women. So it's so stark in the way the job descriptions are written, in the way the insurance policies are made, in the way many things that happen in the workplace. But like I said, all that is changing for better. And the third thing is that this is a topic that's never been discussed openly at workplace in the past. So when you look at leaders who've come from a slightly sort of a more generation which is before us, they find this topic a bit hard to talk about openly, not because they don't want to, but they've not been exposed to that world at all, and therefore it doesn't come naturally for them to be able to have conversations around sexuality, make it a part of something that we want to sort of work towards to build a more inclusive workplace. So I think a couple of these things, which is more the current sort of corporate context, which makes it a bit hard, to have these conversations candidly.
Deepak, what as a counseling therapist, you regularly sensitize organization to issues which related to LGBTQ plus people in the workplace, right? How do you recommend an approach which talks about the concept of sexuality?
I recommend an approach that is first filled with courage, the courage to want to do something, and awareness around the idea that it is the right thing to do. And the third is commitment. So I recommend an approach that has courage, awareness, and commitment. A lot of the times we might have the courage, but we know nothing about the community. We do not involve anyone from the community. Follow the principle of nothing about us without us. If you're talking about a particular community, involve that community. If you, like, for example, I can't be making policies, I can't be making executive decisions that affect women's lives without involving women in that decisions, right? So the idea is that we need to be aware as well, but and commitment. Don't just make it a Pride Month thing. It's good that we have a month where we bring it to the forefront of, our conversations and such, but we are gay 365 days a year. We're not just gay for a month, right? So, and if you are to look at some of the newer reports that are coming out, nearly 10, depending on how you're slicing it, nearly 10 to 20% of the population identifies on some of the other LGBT spectrum. So you're looking at 10 to 20% of your workforce that might or might not feel included or safe at work if you do not show the courage, the awareness, and the commitment to follow through.
Oh, that's a strong point which you made. Apoorva, do you feel this is possible within within a corporate setup, or and any programs or policies that you're looking at right now that touch upon this? What Deepak just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, everything is possible if the intent is right and you have a clear sort of action plan in place. And I can give you the example of WPP where I work currently. Uh, so we launched a community for to work towards greater inclusion for people from the LGBTQ community. It's called the WPP Unite, and in India we came to life last year, and the couple of things that we've been working on, both in the policy and just sort of building an inclusive culture space. I'll give you a few examples just to sort of put this in context, because I know many other organizations are doing in similar or different forms. For example, we're looking at ungendering many of our things, starting with, for example, the job description. We're encouraging all the agencies across the board to use gender neutral language in their job descriptions, both internally and on social media, to give confidence to people outside that we should become the employer of choice for them, irrespective of where they come from. Similarly, some of our policies, we're relooking at the language we use. For example, no more masculine, feminine pronouns that need to be used in policies at all. Thirdly, we're going to encourage people to claim their identity. Simple things like mentioning your preferred pronouns in official signatures if you choose to, because it just helps you to encourage being more authentic at work. Similarly, in the way this whole, encouraging people to be professionally, but encourage gender neutral dressing at workplace. So some of these things we're doing from a policy perspective. We also realize, I mean, we're a 10,000 people organization in the country, right? And if you look at this, is again, like I said, this is not a topic that's been comfortable for many people to discuss within the society, within the corporate world, and so on and so forth. So we want to actually look at sensitivity decoding in a way that where we help our people become sensitive, to understand the space, to be able to sort of create, to help people speak the right language, demonstrate the right behavior, and generally make everybody welcome into the organization. So we've actually been in the process of tying up with a partner to be able to run such sessions for our employees across the board. We also want to provide for certain kind of special infrastructure for people from the community. For example, HIV coverage, for example, employee assistance program counseling, for example, gender neutral washrooms in the workplace, right? And last but not the least, we want to create a system where we are able to hire people from the community actively till this becomes a natural thing for us. And therefore, I believe that it needs to become a cause till it becomes a normalized conversation at workplace. So these are some of the things that we're doing, Danish, in the workplace right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Apoorva, the thing which you mentioned about ungendering is extremely important. Deepak, what I'm going to ask you, let's talk about Pride Month now. Brands and businesses want to celebrate Pride Month, and June is a month, and everyone starts to get vocal. But do you feel this is just a lip service, or there is a deeper sense of change in here?
Well, it's hard to make a generalized statement about every company, but what I do want to say is that even if it is just lip service, I'd rather that we have this than the opposite kind of lip service. Even if they are just coming out to say, yes, we support it and do nothing, at least it puts the perception out that, oh, someone like Accenture and someone like Infosys and someone like, Swiss Re is coming out in support of us. It just validates who I am as
Got
an
it. Yeah.
individual,
Hmm,
right?
hmm,
As
hmm,
opposed to them either being silent, which is a neutral stance, or
hmm,
taking a negative stance and saying, no, all of these things shouldn't be allowed at workplaces. I will not
hmm,
name a university but that I'm going to be talking about, but there was a time when this university came out with a particular letter saying that LGBTQ related activities cannot be allowed in a place of education.
hmm.
And cut to 2018, they were the first sponsors of Pride in that state. All the deeper sense would start at the surface. For some people it could be lip service, for some people it could be this deeper sense of commitment. It all, as Apoorva said, it all comes down to your intentions and the
Hmm.
courage to follow through those intentions.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Right.
we will see, like, for example, you could be like, hey, I support LGBTQ, and then I'll go behind your backs and I'll fund those organizations that are fighting against your rights. Well,
Hmm.
then you don't support me. You just are here to take my money and profit off my trauma. You're not here to support me.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you are going to support me, and this is not an activist talk because I've been doing work in corporate settings for nearly 12 years now. And I
Hmm.
realized this whole activist talk and this like us and them divide and straight people and gay people divide, this doesn't work. What
Hmm.
works is worker. I have to work with you, but I can't condone a company that wears rainbow flags during the Pride Month and then goes and funds somebody like Chick-fil-A, who
Got it.
is who are actively working against gay people not having rights, or actively working against trans people not getting their rights. So that's the kind of lip service that I am kind of against, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, Apoorva, you've been working with talent for over 2 decades now, and diversity has been a core agenda of it. What kind of change have you noticed over time?
Interesting question. So, just to go back, I mean, for me, initially when I started off, when I'm talking about many years ago, I did not understand that, this word called diversity, because I was brought up in a family where me and my brother were both treated exactly equally. So it's only when I went into the corporate world is when I started realizing that there is this whole disparity, sometimes blatant and sometimes not so blatant, that exists, right? And at that time, actually, it was not so much about diversity. Danish, it was more around just creating a more inclusive workforce. Having more, having, for the women that were there in the workforce, for them to have a chance to speak up and all of that. Uh,
Hmm.
I started off actually in a media network, which I won't name here, but
Mm-hmm.
it was very, very shocking to see the kind of inequality that exists in that workplace, where women were generally sort of never hired for senior roles, and secondly that they were always at the service of a senior male uh, leadership, right? But
Mm-hmm.
cut to the years that we spent in the workplace, I think today it's not just diversity that we talk about, but we actually talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, all three together. Literally, it's like a DEI work coming together. And I think all three need to coexist, Danish, if you really want to bring in the change, a positive
Hmm.
change, the
Hmm.
way we look at. Uh, I've seen the change in terms of, for example, more and more senior women becoming part of the leadership or the board in many organizations. Of course, the numbers still remain very dismal, but I think there
Hmm.
is a conscious sort of effort being made in that direction. I think every time there is there is one such thing that happens, you see that being celebrated on the news and the digital, I mean, everywhere, right? I mean, there's so much of chat around that. So I think that's one thing that's happening. Secondly, from a cultural lens, if I were to see, I mean, many organizations are actually now investing in making the workplace culture, so much more sensitive and inclusive to people from the underrepresented groups, and that's a good change to see. I mean, again, just giving you a very small example of WPP, I think we've got communities which are, like I said, focused on LGBTQI, but we've also got a community that works with about 350 women, at the mid-senior leadership across different agencies in the network, to really help them focus on their career growth, the aspirations, what challenges they face, and how do they overcome those challenges, leveraging the freedom of very senior women leaders in the same workspace, right? So I think that's really helping build a culture of where people feel treated equally. And I think the third thing, and I'm just at the cost of repeating myself, I think the policy framework is also very important in organizations, because it's one thing to build a culture, it's one thing to use the right language and all of that, but I think the framework or the policies that we have should also be supportive, whether it's a maternity benefit, whether it's the same-sex parenting benefit, whether it's the adoptive parents benefit, all those also need to sort of promote diversity and equality. And I think if we are able to look at all these different elements around communications, policy, sensitization, all that coming together, I think is definitely creating much more progressive workplaces from what used to be. But I still think there is a lot of ground to cover. We are far away from calling ourselves organizations that are fully progressive in this respect.
It's work in progress, which is a good thing, right? Deepak, I just want to ask you, on celebrating pride, how companies should not approach inclusion and pride, and what do you feel are some ways organization usually get it wrong?
That's a good question. I think when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, just remember one thing. If you don't understand too many things, right? Just remember one question that diversity and inclusion work is asking is I am different from you, and is that okay? I am different from you in ways that you might not understand. You do not have to understand. Your respect is not dependent on you understanding. Your respect is dependent on my existence. I exist and I'm different. Is that okay? If you work in diversity and inclusion spaces with that understanding, everything else is a concept you can learn later. What's a diversity scorecard? What's an equity audit? What's a inclusion index looks like? You can learn all of these are nitty-gritties. You can learn them later. But if you've understood this, you will do LGBT inclusion right. You will do gender inclusion right. You will do disability inclusion right. So one of the ways that you can actually do, there are many ways you can do it wrong. First is tokenism. There are many ways you can do it wrong. First is tokenism. You could bring about like, hey, we've got this 2 or 3 gay people or queer people in our community and trans people. We're going to put you everywhere. And they're just like, but I don't want to be out. I'm okay here, but I don't want to be a poster child of your gay activism. Tokenism is what we do to some of our grandmothers. We go and touch their feet, but we don't listen to them. Remember this fight. Why is June important? June is important because trans women, feminine men of color fought. Companies did not fight for us. Companies jumped on our bandwagon later. Yes, you can absolutely, with your money and your privilege and your power, you can put a lot of fuel in our engines. Absolutely. But please remember, the engine is not yours. You are talking to a community that has been traumatized for years and has it's just been 5 minutes that people have been listening to us. And we understand that sometimes people will get it wrong. It's okay to get it wrong. Okay, so first is tokenism. The second is being so scared to touch this that I will not do anything. I'm not able to get over my fears of being wrong. So what if you're wrong? As Apoorva said that, she's been in diversity and inclusion spaces for 2 decades now. But she's recently started working towards LGBT inclusion. Now, if people like Apoorva, and thank goodness that she's not afraid, but if people like Apoorva start getting filled with fear, and fear paralyzes them, we need people like Apoorva to work with me. We need people like Apoorva to work for the community, right? So don't get too scared. It's okay to make mistakes. You will make mistakes. The third thing that you can do wrong is, again, not walking the walk, right? Just talking too much and not walking the walk. When June is out and the confetti is fallen down and the confetti is being swept off, what do? Has your policies changed? Have you been able to talk to somebody? Don't force people out of closet, for example. And some of the other things is that don't assume, don't play these games of, do you think that person is gay? Do you think that person's lesbian? No, let them come out. It's their journey. Let them do what they're wanting to do. If they feel comfortable, they will come out. Your job is to create that safe and brave space. Your job is not to pull people out of the closet. Right? Because people don't just work for your company, they also have lives outside. They could be accepted in the company and then they're out to the world now and their families might not accept them. Right? So
exactly. Yeah.
the third, the last, not, I mean, I can talk about this, but like I said, there are many ways we can get this wrong. But one of the things is, do not assume that all LGBTQ people are the same. We're not the same. Lesbians have very little in common with gay people, have very little in common with trans people. The only thing that we have in common is discrimination. Our lived experiences are so different from each other, right? Last but not the least, please do not compare us to the best and the worst from our community. You know, this is what we do. Like in Canada and in the UK, I used to live in these neighborhoods where I was probably the only brown person for miles. So all the experience they had of India was through me. I was like, no, don't, that's not India. I'm me. I'm not the representative of the Indian government or India here. So it's, you know, don't compare us to the worst and the best of the experiences that you've had of queer people. That makes us feel like now I have to live up to these standards, or I have to be afraid of what you experienced with another queer person. So I can talk about this till the cows come home, but I think these are some of the major things that you could do to get it wrong.
I'll bring in Apoorva and ask her thoughts on it. What does she think about it?
You know, so I mean, very insightful points from Deepak, and it actually makes you really think and wonder. But you know, exactly to the point that you made earlier, this is not about tokenism, right? It's like how we celebrate International Women's Day on 8th of March. One day you celebrate women and then you think you've done everything. And similarly, you know, you celebrate the month of June for the community and then you feel that, you know, you've done what you had to do. So it's not like a tick in the box. It's also not, it's not like Diwali or Christmas, which you celebrate for a day, right? This is not a festival, for God's sake. You're talking about people who need to be sort of treated with respect and, you know, made to feel that we are being inclusive. And I totally get the point about being, you know, this whole thing about in this whole desire to create unity, we've got to appreciate the fact that there is diversity of people, and we need to you know, respect that diversity of people. But I do think, Danish, that you know, sometimes you need to sort of, you know, make this into a cause till it becomes a normalized conversation or a normalized thing for us. So therefore, this whole thing of celebrating the month of Pride, or, you know, the World Disability Day or the International Women's Day is important, but it shouldn't stop there. It's the beginning of a journey that you need to make, and whether you know it fully or not, as long as you're able to bring people together, as long as you're able to think of a plan that would help you to, you know, reach the goals that you set out to achieve in this space, everything is possible. But it can't stop with just celebrating these days. It's an ongoing, continuous thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, it's like your birthday. You celebrate it once a year, but that doesn't mean you forget yourself for the rest of the year. It's good to know that, oh, this marks the day I came into this planet. But I still have to love, respect, and stay motivated for the rest of the year as well.
Absolutely. So I mean, and that's incredible exchange of thoughts and ideas which we discussed right now. Final questions to both of you. Any learnings you think came up in this discussion and you want to share this with the audience? Apoorva, you go first, and then we'll go to Deepak.
I mean, incredible, right? I mean, Deepak is Deepak has got so much of, I mean, his own lived experiences, but also for the kind of work that he's done for the community, which is incredible. And I think just to hear him talk about, the way to think about this and the way to sort of act upon this, the need to have courage. It's okay to operate with fear, but don't give up in between, kind of message. I think it's all very, very powerful. And I think the other thing that I felt is very important to understand is that we've started late on this journey, but like this, it's better late than never. So I think corporates should really take the charge and the lead now from here on, because I think the community's done what they had to do for themselves, and corporates and are sort of waking up to the idea of working on this aspect. And I think it's high time that collectively we sort of move forward to bring in a positive change with help of people like Deepak, who've been sort of very, very effective spokespeople from the community and for the community. So I think for me, that's been a great learning experience, honestly.
Yeah, great, great. Deepak, your thoughts?
For me, it's been, you know, I can't tell you how happy I am to see someone like Apoorva on this planet and this panel. It just redefines and reaffirms the idea and the importance of allyship. If we have allies, people who are not from the community but are with the community and stand next to the community, who speak with us, not about us and not in front of us, that's important. And if people like Apoorva, we have more and more people like Apoorva, and more corporations are able to understand that it doesn't just make sense to their bottom lines, it also makes moral and it also makes civic sense to do these things. It also makes principled sense to do these things. That's when we're going to go ahead. And for that, we need people who are allies. So I'd like to thank TOSB and Apoorva for this wonderful exchange of ideas and for the work that she does. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Deepak. Danish, thank you. It's been a fantastic opportunity to do this with Deepak, and yeah, to your entire team for setting this up for us.
Thank you, Deepak and Apoorva, both for taking out the time and being part of the TOSB conversations. Thank you.